Greetings and welcome back to another episode of The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, the show where I, the curator, discuss my personal favorite show of all time, personal favorite franchise of all time, Doctor Who. And wrapping up our historical month of the month of May, originally there was supposed to be a completely different episode. I had a completely different concept in mind with a completely different guest. Unfortunately, that guest, who shall not be named at the moment because that's still a surprise, we managed to reschedule to another time, so you'll know that when that happens, but he couldn't make it, unfortunately, so I decided to just completely restructure the entire point of what this episode is and do something a bit new and creative. This time, I'm going to do a first for this series, and I'm going to cover a book series from Doctor Who, and here to help me trudge through these uncharted territories, unknown waters, is the wonderful Mr. Snark. How are you doing, sir?
Fine, fine. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Not a bad consolation prize, I would say.
Well, yeah, I mean, I never said it's a consolation prize. It's just
Oh my god.
the idea, the original idea, I thought would have been really, really cool and something I really wanted to try out. But alas, I had to reschedule. So hold on, let me just.
Uh-oh.
For those of you who don't know, or rather haven't heard, I'm a little bit sick, as you can see. You can kind of hear it in my voice. I came down with something a little yesterday, so if I sound a bit off, or more importantly, if I mess something up or forget an important detail, that's my excuse for now. So now, I mean, like I forgot to introduce my subtitle. I'm now not only just the curator, I'm also the librarian. You'll see why in just a bit. But for now, before we get into all that, we got ourselves the infamous birthday section, as we usually tend to do. Now, of course, right now we are counting down from the 23rd of May all the way to the 29th of May. And starting us off, I think you're actually really going to enjoy this. On the 23rd of May, we have Mr. Don Warrington. As seen in this picture, obviously, he played the President of Great Britain in the Rise of the Cybermen, the story from the David Tennant story from the his first season, I should say. But he also played Lord President Rassilon on Big Finish, specifically in Zagreus and The Next Life, which was really cool. So he was the president before he was the president, in a way. Now, on the 24th, we have Miss Jo Joyner. She was initially cast as Linda Moss in the two-parter Bad Wolf and The Parting of the Ways, almost a companion, and then she was cast as another role in the more recent The War Master series on Big Finish, specifically the box set titled Self-Defense. Now, also on the 24th, there's a lot of people on the 24th, so we're going to stay on that wave for a little bit. And this one was actually a little bit more for Soda, because we talked about it. By the way, Soda was supposed to be here today for those of you watching, but fortunately he couldn't make it. So I'm a little bit bummed that we can talk about a little bit more about Will Sasso.
Yay.
Now, we used to talk a lot about how he appeared in the movie as that one doctor guy that was on shift.
Watching Frankenstein.
Yeah, watching Frankenstein when the doctor regenerated and just fainted. That was a really funny scene. Now, this was interesting. Also on the 24th, Mr. Rob Edwards. He was a character called Chubb in The Robots of Death. Okay. And he also was essentially Zoanon, the evil supercomputer from the Face of Evil. But this is the interesting part that I only discovered watching, rather while putting this list together. He was actually a Foley editor on the later half of the Class one season, which is weird. Do you know what a Foley editor even is? Because I have no idea.
Foley is all the stuff like doors opening and footsteps and those kind of things. It's sounds like
Okay,
storms and thunder and stuff like how you make it practically.
okay, cool. So I've learned something new today. Now, also on the 24th, we have Professor Slughorn. I mean, Jim
Yes,
Broadbent, who of course played. Yeah, well, of course he played a version of the 11th Doctor ish and Doctor Who and the Curse of Fatal Death, as well as another Doctor Who spoof, which, to be honest, I don't think even has a name. But it's like a minute long, so it doesn't really need any. But it's pretty funny, I think. And he's got one of the best Doctor outfits, in my opinion. Also, on the 25th now, I think you're going to recognize Sir Ian McKellen from
who?
certain things.
Yeah,
Oh, you don't know him? He's Gandalf
yeah.
in the Peter
Which one?
Jackson movies. In
Ooh,
the Peter
okay,
Jackson
sure,
movie. Yeah,
sure, sure.
he's also Magneto. In case you didn't know.
Oh, right, right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
that was him. Yeah, and he also
Okay.
voiced the great intelligence in Snowman, as well as a cameo as himself as Gandalf in the Five-ish Doctors reboot. Have you ever seen that one?
No.
It's incredible. I love it. Highly recommend checking it out. I believe it's on YouTube.
Okay.
Now, from one easily recognizable British actor to the next, on the 26th, it's Peter Cushing. Yeah, he was Doctor Who, not the Doctor. He was Doctor Who in two movies featuring the Daleks. And we're just continuing along with the easily recognizable names. We have on the 28th Kylie Minogue, who of course played the one-off pseudo companion Astrid Peth in Voyage of the Damned. But I mean,
Yep.
it's Kylie Minogue, so you can kind of guess why she's here. And
I
another
can't
one on
get
the
her out of my
28th,
head.
exactly. And uh, you know, there's the one episode where the doctor says, "Oh, that's never too late," as a wise person once said. Kylie, I think.
Hmm.
So yeah, also on the 28th, and also a easily recognizable person that only has one credit in Doctor Who, Carrie Mulligan,
Oh
who of
yeah.
course was uh, Sally Sparrow in the wonderful episode Blink, and was originally supposed to come back as a full-time companion, but then she was, she was Carrie Mulligan, so she was too big for Doctor Who for a bit.
Bigger, better things, I guess, in her
Yeah,
mind. Getting
lots.
nominated for Oscars and stuff.
Yeah,
Whatever.
the little things, the little
Hmm.
things. Now, on the 29th, we have Mr. Frederick Jaeger, or Jaeger. I apologize if I butchered that. He got his start as playing Jano in The Savages and Sorensen in Planet of
Hmm.
Evil, but his easily most recognizable part is, of course, as playing Professor Marius, the creator of K9 in The Invisible Enemy.
I
So,
can't. I can't decide what I like better: his haircut or his beard.
why not both?
You're right.
I mean, why do you have to choose?
I don't have to. You're
And
exactly right.
fine. And finally, wrapping this up on the 29th, it's Pearl Mackie, who played, of course, Bill Potts, the companion of the 12th Doctor, and the first openly gay companion on the show specifically. So, the wonderful list of people we had today. Thank you all. We quite literally could not do any of this without you.
Hmm.
However, now we're not actually talking about anything from the show,
Right.
surprisingly enough, because we are now jumping into our very first breakdown of a book series, specifically the Timewyrm series. So, are you familiar with the Virgin New Adventures, by the way, Mr. Snark?
No.
Okay, so a little bit of background. After the show got canceled in 1989.
Hmm.
You may have heard of that.
Oh well, sure, sure.
There was no Doctor Who for a bit, other than just the Doctor Who magazine, which was still running around doing its own thing. So the public was sort of, shall we say, starving for new Doctor Who content to fill in that gap, because even though Doctor Who wasn't on air, it never actually went away. So the best possible replacement for that was a series of novels published by Virgin, known as the Virgin New Adventures, and feature the continuation of Doctor Who post Survival. The last episode aired from the classic series, featuring the seventh Doctor and Ace. This was before any talks of other novels featuring the other Doctors was even in consideration.
And the weird
And
cats and the master and that stuff too, isn't it?
no, the cats that was Survival, and this is
Yeah.
like after it. This
Yeah.
is the continuation. Think of it as sort of Sylvester McCoy's fourth season that never happened.
Okay, sure.
Think of it like that. And it was so successful, it spawned like 60 novels, I think. The last one or two also featured Paul McGann before he got his own standalone line of novels called the Eight Doctor novels. And then obviously then that's when the Missing Adventures came into a series of novels featuring scripts that would have been episodes but never actually made it to air, as well as the Past Doctor Adventures, which is a series of novels featuring Doctors 1 to 7, separate from the 8th Doctor stuff. And of course, the first series, when the Virgin New Adventures started, they knew they needed to start with a big bang, which is why they came up with a quadrilogy of stories known as the Timewyrm series. Now, the reason I decided to put this breakdown at the tail end of this month is because this series, particularly the first two, are heavily tied in with history and historical moments that haven't necessarily been featured in Doctor Who on the show, and more specifically historical moments that would be, shall we say, a bit tricky to bring to television in the family friendly realm, if you catch my meaning.
All right.
So we're going to start with the first installment of this series, Timewyrm Genesis. Now, this novel basically. Now, of course, we're not going to go through every single detail here because there's 4 novels. I'm just going to give you a basic breakdown of the plots with some gaps to keep people watching interested enough to maybe check out these novels themselves. Now, this book basically opens with a massive space fight above the skies of planet Earth, with a spaceship being piloted by a female character being shot down, crash landing on Earth somewhere, and the ship shooting at it, thinking that the occupant of that ship is now dead. They just run off. They assume that their job was done, but the occupant of the ship is very much alive and starts crawling her way out of the spaceship when she encounters the mythical character known as Gilgamesh.
Oh.
Using her psychic powers, she reads Gilgamesh's mind, and she tries to convince him to help her by impersonating the mythical goddess Ishtar, which, if you are familiar with the tales of Gilgamesh, you know that Gilgamesh has a certain history with that particular character in his own stories. Of course, we're not going to get into that because Gilgamesh himself instantly recognizes her as not being Ishtar and refuses to help her, which she's not very happy with. So he just walks off and continues his Gilgameshy stuff, leaving the fake Ishtar stranded in the dirt in the ruins of her spaceship, where she vows revenge on him. We are then the story then cuts to the TARDIS with Ace having lost her memories. Like, she wakes up in her room in the TARDIS without her memories, and that's an interesting way to introduce this character into an audience that hasn't watched Doctor Who for 2 years already.
Right.
But she starts wandering around the TARDIS, wondering what is this place where she woke up, where she finds the Doctor fiddling with the TARDIS Council, and after a brief conversation between the two, we learn that the Doctor is now editing his own memory, essentially erasing from his mind some of the things that he didn't think were important enough to remember. Because Time Lords can do that apparently right now.
Nice.
So
Lucky.
He wish I could erase some stuff that I want to make room for other stuff, but I'm not a Time Lord. After he fiddles with the TARDIS and brings Ace's memories back, she remembers who she is, and now that this whole plot line was kind of pointless, but at least now she knows who she is. They're suddenly being interrupted by a projection from the Fourth Doctor.
Ooh.
Now, I believe you have seen the Invasion of Time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you remember in that episode, there's a sort of moment towards the end where the Doctor loses his memory. Like he goes into the Matrix to find something to stop the Sontarans and comes back having no recollection of anything that happened in the serial itself.
Right.
And there's a bit of a gap there. So it turns out that during that gap, the Doctor, while inside the Matrix, discovered an ancient Time Lord myth known as the Timewyrm, and he managed to record a recording of himself into the TARDIS databanks to his future self, knowing that he himself won't remember any of this, but he recorded something for his future self to ensure that when the threat of the Timewyrm will be very much real and alive, his future self will be well equipped to stop it. And so the Doctor and Ace now need to land on Earth, or rather in the coordinates where the Doctor sent to them to find and stop the Timewyrm. There's also a sequence with several past companions of various Doctors telling the Doctor and Ace hints and clues as far as where to go, but that's really the basic gist of it. There's the Fourth Doctor cameo in this book, which then leads us directly into the plot of the Timewyrm. And as you can see right here, that's Gilgamesh right there at the back, and then there's Ishtar, or rather the fake Ishtar, and at the front. Now, upon landing, the Doctor and Ace happen to land in the middle of a massive fight between Gilgamesh and his best friend Enkidu, and a series of warriors from the neighboring city of Kish. Of course, they land, and Ace does her usual Nitro 9 explosive things to scare them off, and that is when Gilgamesh and Enkidu start to perceive them both as gods, because of course they are. I mean, when has that ever happened before or since in Doctor Who? Of course, they immediately believe that the Doctor, or rather, the Doctor impersonates the mythical god Ea, the god of wisdom, and Ace impersonates the goddess Aya, the goddess of dawn, and they join Enkidu and Gilgamesh in their quest to conquer the city of Kish. Now, there's some subplots happening in the city of Kish that we're not really going to talk about at the moment for time concerns, but basically it kind of deals with the king of the Kish essentially being a slave to fake Ishtar and his daughter plotting against her, and there's like a priestess or handmaiden of the temple that eventually joins up with the Doctor and friends to try and undermine Ishtar. In any case, Gilgamesh and Enkidu are joined by the Doctor and Ace to infiltrate the city of Kish. There's some interesting moments between Gilgamesh and Ace, because as you probably know, Gilgamesh used to be very frisky with the women back in the day, and wasn't exactly 100% accepted by some people, and especially not Ace, who's like the definition of touch me and you're dead, essentially. So there's some really funny moments where he tries to be the Gilgamesh that we weren't familiar with, and she just shots him down and puts him in his place. So there's obviously that.
At least she didn't hit him with a bat.
She might have done. I don't know. It's been a while since I read the first book, so that's why I'm skipping certain moments. But yeah, so eventually they get discovered, and they have to run away from the city of Kish and go back to the city of Uruk, where Gilgamesh, of course, lives. There's a subplot that quickly gets dropped about people from Uruk trying to assassinate the king, which doesn't really come up again at all throughout the remainder of the book. But yeah, then after that, they decide to split up. Unfortunately, Ace has to stick around with Gilgamesh and Enkidu, while the Doctor goes back to the city of Kish to try and find what Ishtar is really doing in there. Along the way, Ace, Enkidu, Gilgamesh, and this new character Avram eventually run across the character of Utnapishtim from the Tales of Gilgamesh stories, but it turns out it's not really the actual mythical uh, character of Utnapishtim. It's really an alien from another planet called Anu, which then reveals to them the full story of what they are doing in there. It turns out that the fake Ishtar was actually a resident of the planet Anu called Kataka, who became mystified with the idea of immortality upon learning of the existence of the Time Lords and did her best to try and mimic immortality, even going so far as to putting her consciousness in a robotic body and sailing out across the stars and trying to kill people. Of course, later down the story, as told by Utnapishtim, she blows up the planet Anu with a cobalt bomb, and Utnapishtim, and Utnapishtim and his people chased her down, trying to shoot her ship down, which eventually is the opening sequence of the book.
Okay.
So now it all ties into that, and now
Hmm.
Utnapishtim teams up with the other characters from the story to try and bring her down. Essentially, at one point in the book, just all the characters team up to try and stop the fake Ishtar, which is actually Kataka.
Right.
Now, eventually, they sort of stop her by leading her into the TARDIS, and once she's in the TARDIS, she gets the whiff of the true power of Time Lord technology, and even going so far as to infiltrating inside the TARDIS, becoming a computer virus living inside the TARDIS, learning all about time and history and the power of the Time Lords, where she eventually decides to change her name to the Timewyrm, and that is how
Yeesh.
we get the idea that essentially, while trying to stop something, the Doctor actually ended up creating it in the first place. The doctor tries to throw several different plots at her to try and stop her. All of them fail. Turns out she's more powerful than even he had even conceived. So what does the Doctor do in this situation?
Snake charmer.
Close. He was
Ooh.
definitely a charmer. He very quickly switches places with his third incarnation to try and stop it, because, as he even himself claims, his third persona was much better at defusing bombs than he was. So
Yep.
eventually they end up stopping the Time Worm, or rather dispersing her throughout history, not quite necessarily dead, just out of harm's way and far away from ancient Mesopotamia, allowing Gilgamesh and the other characters from that era to continue on their story, ensuring that history stays intact. And that was, for the most part, the end of the first novel in this series. Now, before we jump into novel number 2, what are your thoughts on this story so far?
Uh, I'm quite proud of you for getting the names and stuff right. That would have driven me nuts. There's so many names that are so similar.
Well,
Uh,
they're mentioned. They're mentioned in the book many,
yeah,
many, many times.
yeah.
So you kind of
Uh,
have to.
what did you think? Like, this is the first. Is this the first book that came out? This is the first one following the end of this season there, or the end of this actual TV series. Did it read like an actual chapter? Did it read like a television show, or was it more? Did it feel it's more of a book?
I mean, these novels are very short. They're like
Right.
100 to 120 pages each.
Right.
So around the length of a 4-part or 6-part serial of an episode of the show. But I think it's more the content inside. The
Yeah.
text inside doesn't necessarily feel much. It definitely feels like it's aiming for a much more mature audience. I mean, case in point, it's got Gilgamesh and Ishtar in it, and there's a lot of, uh, I would say, unnecessary sex scenes in this.
Well.
Not really necessarily sex scenes, but a lot of sex stuff
Right.
in this novel, specifically with Gilgamesh and several other characters. But I mean, it, and also the doctor doesn't necessarily feel like he should. Like, in those moments where he tries to bring back Ace's memory, he's just being a douche, and that's sort of a persona that he maintains throughout the majority of this novel, where he's just being a douche to Ace for
Right.
no good reason. Like, imagine very early Capaldi
Okay.
level of doucheness, and a lot of it is unnecessary. Thankfully, in some of the other next novels along the series, he sort of mellows down and actually becomes the much more friendly uncle persona that the Seventh Doctor is more known for, especially with Ace.
Right.
But I don't think it was written the best way specifically for the characters, but as a start to what is essentially a four-part story. Imagine this as a miniseries, like a seasonal arc. As a start, I think it sets up everything that it needs to in the best way that it could
Okay.
under the circumstances. And again, this is still a first for them, so they're not 100% sure where they want this series to go.
I'm just finding it interesting. I'm looking at the titles, and the four books are written by four different authors. So
Yeah,
it might be interesting to see how that comes together by the end.
I mean that happens a lot with Doctor Who, especially if you notice on Big Finish where they do these on the monthly range. They used to do these trilogies
Yeah.
where it's a contained story, but completely different stories in between them with different writers for each. So it's like something starts to get set up in the first. They have to continue it with the second one and wrap it up in the third. But in the meantime, they just tell their own separate stories, and each one connects to one another.
Okay.
Okay, so should we go to the next book?
Oh, and I'm also noticing that the titles are almost biblical too, right? Genesis, Exodus, Apocalypse, but I can't see what the last one's called.
Revelation.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
That was intentional.
Yeah,
That was
sure.
intentional. So jumping into Exodus, we have a different threat, something different from your traditional gods against the Doctor. We have Nazis,
Oh, good.
because of course we do. So, following the trail of the Timewyrm, the Doctor and Ace eventually land on 1950s London that essentially has been taken over by Nazis. Apparently, it turns out they landed in an alternate timeline where the Nazis won, and all of Great Britain essentially became a Nazi state. And they meet something called the British Freikorps, which essentially it's like what's it called, the Vichy government, the government in France, Lower France, that actually worked with the Nazis.
Right. I
I
think you
think
might
it's
be
called
right.
the.
The
I think it's
Vichy,
called the.
Vichy. Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
Vichy?
I
Yeah.
think so.
Yeah.
So anyway, the British Freikorps are essentially Britons who have joined the Nazi ranks and
Yeah.
are essentially operating as the Nazi government on behalf of the Führer in England. They get captured by this officer called Lieutenant Hemmings, who is essentially like an enforcer, a torturer of for the British Freikorps. He takes them in and he tries to break them in the best way that Nazis are known for. They manage to escape. They meet this real highly important Nazi scientist who was shot and fell into to the river and died. The Doctor takes his credentials and essentially goes back and pretends to be that Nazi scientist. Much to the chagrin of Lieutenant Hemmings, he just goes and really starts to schmooze with Lieutenant Hemmings' superior, and essentially manages to fool everyone except Hemmings into thinking that he's the real deal, and that's why he sort of starts this long con of trying to take down the Nazis in Great Britain, by pretending to snuff out the rebels, the people rising up against the Nazis. What in a way he's actually joining those people rising up against the Nazis, essentially selling them out, only to fool the Nazis again. It's like a con on a trick on a trick on a trick on a trick, like
Mm-hmm.
like the Seventh Doctor is most famous for. Unfortunately, by the end of it, he does get called out, and then the Doctor and Ace eventually have to try and find their way back to the TARDIS and travel back in time to prevent this alternate timeline from happening. Turns out that what really happened was the Timewyrm, while traveling through space, he tried to find a way to stop the Doctor by hurting him where she knows it's going to hurt the most, messing with the history of planet Earth. And what better way to do that than with World War II? She eventually infects the mind of
Oh boy.
someone who will be very prominent in World War II, as she knows. But unfortunately for her, it turns out that the person she infected, his mind is so dark, so far gone, so incredibly twisted that she just gets swallowed up by that person's persona, and unintentionally ends up elevating that person far beyond what that person ever should have been.
Hmm.
Now they go back in time to the mid 1920s, I believe, in Germany, pre-Nazi Germany, when the National Socialism Party was still getting its feet on the ground, starting to found itself. When they find the head speaker of the National Socialist Party, a young man known as Adolf Hitler, where it turned where during the propaganda rally, someone tries to assassinate him while while he's giving his speech. And what do you think the Doctor does?
Saves him again.
Yep, he saves
Ugh.
him and makes sure that he eventually grows up to be the Adolf Hitler that we're all familiar with. During this time, Ace tries to assassinate him again, where
Sorry.
the Doctor stops her, and then the Doctor ends up giving her the speech about why you need to preserve history, even the bad history, and all that spiel. While during that time, while they were standing in the corner talking, they are being observed by a mysterious hooded figure that we don't know about, but he certainly knows the Doctor. He considers the Doctor his greatest enemy.
Oh boy.
I mean, it's implied in the book that the Doctor did something to him, and and he's looking for revenge. He tries to shoot him with an energy blast and misses, forcing the Doctor and Ace to run back to the TARDIS and travel to the future, to a later point in Hitler's timeline, and try to help him there. Now, we don't know who this character is just yet. I'll let you ponder that
Hmm.
for a little bit. But then obviously we get to the early 1930s, when Hitler has already been named the Chancellor of Germany. We get introduced to other very pleasant characters, such as Heinrich Himmler. Yeah, it's this episode really dives deep into some of the other Nazi characters. Forgotten this guy's name also, but he's also in it. Do you want me to look him up again? Or
Who's that? That's not Rommel, is it?
no, no,
Not the
no, that's not
Desert
Rommel.
Fox. That's
That's
not
not
the
Rommel.
Desert Fox.
I think he was the head of the SS,
Right.
or was that Himmler? Either way, so these two guys, Himmler and the other guy, are sort of butting heads with each other all throughout the novel. One keeps trying to one up each other and prove to Hitler that he's the more loyal. There's also other real historical Nazis in this story, but really those two are the main integral characters to the story. And we also get introduced to the mysterious Dr. Kriegsleiter, who is not a real historical figure, but he is very much important. Now, during the story, that Hitler remembers that the Doctor saved his life when he was a young man. Really, he's very thankful for the Doctor for helping him um, rise to power. He essentially credits the Doctor for helping him become who he is, in a way. And the Doctor essentially gets VIP treatment while he's in Hitler's care. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to look up the name of the guy. Hermann Goring, that's his name.
Goring.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Goring. Yeah, or Hermann Boring,
Oh,
but
boring.
sorry, my bad. But yeah, Hermann Goring and Heinrich Himmler watch the Doctor getting all this special treatment, and they're sort of starting to get afraid that he might actually overtake them in their position. The Doctor stays in five star hotels, and under Hitler's protection. And one time when he has a conversation with Hitler about, do you think that what you're doing is actually good? You know, that usual conversation that the Doctor generally sometimes have with these villainous characters. Hitler starts to lose it, and I mean lose it. He starts yelling and screaming. He starts throwing stuff in his office, breaking stuff. Suddenly, he starts displaying telekinetic powers that just
What?
throw everything. Yeah, it just starts throwing everything in the office uh, around. He starts mumbling certain things that Hitler at that particular time in history shouldn't know just yet, essentially leading the Doctor to suspect that Hitler's mind has been infected by the time worm,
Mm-hmm.
which then obviously ties into the what I said earlier in the book, where Ishtar, essentially, rather not Ishtar, the time worm essentially infected the mind of Adolf Hitler. Now, obviously, the Doctor time jumps several times throughout the novel, through several different time periods, where eventually he starts to see the progression of the war itself. We sort of get to the mid 40s. We learn about Hitler not being too sure whether he could take Great Britain or not. But during that time, that sort of becomes a side story where the Doctor really just follows the mysterious Doctor Kriegsleiter and his dealings with Goring and Himmler. Eventually, Ace gets knocked unconscious and captured, kidnapped by people working for Dr. Kriegsleiter, and taken to an SS training camp where, stop me if you heard this before, they're going through brainwashing. In addition to the Nazi philosophy. So it's brainwashing on top of brainwashing, turning them into essentially multifunctional, essentially zombies, to work for Kriegsleiter and the people he's associating with. So basically, they're turning Nazis into zombie Nazis in a way,
Right.
but still living, which is where the Doctor goes to save her, and that is when they discover the true identity of Dr. Kriegsleiter and why he hates the Doctor so much. Do you have a guess as to who this guy is?
Master.
Close, but no cigar.
Ooh, okay. The Ronnie.
No.
Okay. I have who else? Who else could it be? Not the Master. If it's close,
I mean,
Rassilon?
messing with time and um, using regular humans as soldiers to form a grand army.
No. Who is it?
You don't know?
I can't think of it.
It's the War Chief
Oh, sure.
from the War Games. Did you watch the War Games, by the way?
I must have.
It's Patrick Troughton's final episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And yeah, it has the guy that looks like Noel Gallagher at the end.
Yeah, which some people think is the Master. Some people think it isn't.
Right. You
But
were telling me this when we were going through the Master stuff there.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't believe he's the Master. I much prefer the idea of him being it's his own character, especially because of what happens in this book, because it's wild.
Hmm.
So obviously, Dr. Kriegsleiter is revealed to be the War Chief, and the people he's associating with, and who are helping him brainwash these SS soldiers, are, of course, the warlords from the War Games story. Apparently, at some point, the son of the original warlord from the TV episode, managed to find a way to, with the help of the war chief, to break through the blockade that the Time Lords placed on their planet, and teamed up with him to try and take revenge on the Time Lords by essentially turning the Nazis into super Nazis, in a way. Now, in that episode, if you haven't watched the War Games, here is a big spoiler that you might want to, if you're watching this, if you might want to skip a little bit ahead. So the war chief gets shot in the back at the end of the episode. So yeah,
Too bad.
the doctor sort of calls him out. At the time, the warlords uh, take him prisoner, and he tries to escape, and they shoot him dead. But of course, as we all know, he's a Time Lord. So
Mm.
he starts regenerating, and according to the book, this book specifically, the warlords are a bit curious as to what is actually happening, what is happening, why is his body starting to change. So they try to kill him again, essentially causing his regeneration to be aborted. And this is really the first time we get introduced to the concept of an aborted regeneration. Can you guess what that means?
He's dead for good.
No,
Oh boy.
it's essentially a regeneration stopped halfway through, meaning he's halfway with his older body and his new body.
Ew.
So when he takes off his hood and robes, you sort of start to see something from a complete nightmare where he's got like a secondary chin protruding from his real chin, another cranium bumping out, two pairs of arms sort of attached to itself. His torso is really contorted and changed, trying to fit two bodies in it. He's got like four legs, two from his regular body and two from his new one. Like they took a secondary body and splashed it all over his older body. So essentially, he's trying to inhabit two bodies at the same time, and is in constant pain as a result.
A thing that should not be. He's a thing that
Exactly,
should
a thing that should not be, even among Time Lords. It's a rarity and something that most Time Lords try to avoid.
Pretty
So,
gross.
in a way, you could say that he never really got himself a new body at last.
They should have stuck it right there. That would have been a good thing.
Yeah. So basically, he's a mutant man, like two bodies inhabiting the same body. It's crazy, and of course, he blames the doctor for it. And well, it turns out throughout the episode, Ace just becomes a ritualistic sacrifice for the Nazis. The Nazis used to believe in a lot of weird, random stuff. But
Yeah.
anyways, the doctor
They tried to get the Ark of the Covenant.
clearly, as we all know from history, right?
Yep. Yep.
And of
Well,
course, they
didn't
found
work
this,
out well for them.
yeah, and of course, they found this magic blue box that controls space or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And well, long story short, the doctor stops them and he saves Ace. Travels a little bit to the future, to the tail end of the war. He finds Hitler in his bunker and really tries to piss him off by telling him that his name will essentially be remembered as Mud all throughout history. He's going to become the most hated man in history for all time, always. Really trying to get on his nerves. And really what he's trying to do is he's trying to anger the Timewyrm inside his head, eventually causing her to leave his brain, leaving Hitler as the regular person who was eventually going to get killed in the end of the war anyway. And he traps the Timewyrm, or rather tries to trap the Timewyrm again, but she escapes again, because if you haven't noticed already, there's 4 books we have to talk about.
Yeah,
So
slippery.
She's a very slippery
Person.
snake.
Got that
Or a
snake
worm.
face. Mm-hmm.
So that, of course, that brings us to the end of the story. The story ends with the Doctor and Ace going back into the regular 1950s London to try and make sure that that the changes they tried to implement actually did happen. And lo and behold, history's back on track the proper way. So that's really how the book itself ends, which then leads to the next book. Now, before we jump into that one, what say you about this second book? In my opinion, it's the best of the 4, but that's just me.
This is twice now that the doctors had a chance to wipe out Adolf Hitler before World War II and has failed to do so on purpose. So you got to question the doctor's motives sometimes.
I mean,
yeah,
6 points in time and all that.
All that. Yeah, it's a shame. Yeah, I would have liked it if we got to hear about more Nazis being run down and stuff like that, and getting the hell kicked out of them.
Read the book.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Yeah. Ace. Yeah. Didn't hear very much about Ace in this entire thing, except for being at the end or whatever, being a human sacrifice. I guess she wasn't as big a part of this book.
No, remember, I am skipping a lot of things here
Hmm.
to talk about the important stuff.
Okay.
So, are we ready for the next book?
Apocalypse.
Exactly, Timewyrm Apocalypse. Now, this book, I'm gonna be honest, I'm gonna be skipping the majority of it because not only does it not necessarily have to do with much of history, and this is the history month, it
Right.
also mainly takes place on another planet.
No,
So
okay.
we're
They
only
can
going
have
to
their
draw.
own history.
Yes, they do, but well, it's kind of important to read the book, and
Okay.
really, you'll notice that all the history of this planet can pretty much be explained in a sentence. But yeah, so while trying to find the time worm, the Doctor starts to have flashbacks to his first regeneration, where apparently shortly after he regenerated into his second incarnation, they didn't immediately land where the next episode takes place in the Power of the Daleks. He had a side adventure on a planet where he met a little girl and fixed her a little toy doll. Sorry, my bad. He fixed her little toy doll, and she went along her way, and he went back into the TARDIS, and then, of course, the actual episode happened. Now, then the seventh Doctor, back to the seventh Doctor, and Ace landing on a planet called Kirith, where it turns out they live in a sort of weird society of the chosen people. Eventually, get to
Ooh.
be taken to this big, massive city and become the important scholars and builders of the society. Where eventually they're being taken into another place called the Pandastry. No, the Pandastry is the people um, in charge of uh, everything, and the chosen people get to be taken to the not the Catriarch. Sorry, what is it? Hold on. Yeah, trying to do this while sick really hurts my head.
Hmm.
Okay, it doesn't say. But basically, it's they're taken into the elite area where this older woman with a crown puts her crown on their head, and they melt, and she absorbs their properties into her body.
Woohoo.
So yeah, wonderful dystopian society to live in. Am I right? Anyway, so the Doctor and friends sort of reached that place. They meet this guy Raphael, who's sort of upset that his best friend Darian has gone missing. They meet this this really nice person called what's his name, Myril. That's his name, Myril, who was originally the tutor of Darian, who dies at the beginning of the book, and now is the tutor of Raphael. They sort of are being once again being taken as guests of honor there, where they start to realize that there's something shady going on, and the doc with the way the society is built, and sort of they have no personal history, no ancestors. They can't even remember the names of their own grandparents for some reason. And through some investigation, obviously the Doctor and Ace get separated, as they usually tend to do. Ace and Raphael eventually meet these people called the Unlike in the forest area, where they meet basically the Unlike, just like what I just told you about the war chief.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine creatures from your very nightmares. People with like one arm is like really short and the other one is so long that it sort of drags on the floor behind them. These people with improportionate bodies, like really large heads and tiny bodies, with really tiny legs with large torsos, like sort of balding in one side of the head, and the other side of the head is like sprouting
Mutants.
dreads. Yeah,
Mutants.
mutants, people who have been genetically experimented upon, and I'm talking people with like translucent skin. You can see their bones and internal organs,
Ugh.
and really long fingers with massive sharp
Ugh.
claws. And like I said, creatures from your nightmares that you can't actually see because it's a book, so there is no proper
Hmm.
depiction of them. You can kind of see something like that right here in this cover. The blue woman standing there. This blue woman
Right.
is referred to as Arun. She's the leader of the Unlike, and she leads Ace and Raphael and yeah, and her and essentially the doctor of the Unlike called Kraz into an experimental facility where they find a creature known as the homunculus. Basically, a
Hmm.
creature that the Pandestry on that planet created by themselves. And it's not really this creature that you see here in the sky, but imagine something like this, like with something with multiple mouths and different colored, different eyes on its massive, massive head, several different arms, and it's in a fetal position, like a monster,
Yes.
a mutated genetic monster that never should have
A
existed.
freak.
Yeah,
Freak.
a freak. Meanwhile, the Doctor goes through several different layers of hell, trying to figure out what this place is all about. Eventually, along the way, discovering that that essentially they've landed in the far, far future, close to the end of the universe, where the universe itself is expanded to the point where it's starting to unravel and collapse in on itself. And the Pandestry is basically trying to create a new race of perfect people to outlive the end of the universe. Stop me if you heard that one before.
Sure.
But along the way, he sort of in one of those layers of trying to reach to find the truth, he meets his second incarnation, a
Cool.
previous version of himself, and they essentially have this dream world conversation with one another, where the second Doctor tries to remind him of that one time at the beginning of the book where he accidentally landed so very close to having been regenerated and helping a small little girl uh, by fixing her toy. Who that girl is, we'll find out in just a minute, because eventually the
Oh
Doctor
boy.
gets reunited with Ace, Meryl, and the other people. The homunculus dies while trying to uh, attack to attack Ace and the others, and eventually they get transported up to the main platform. That at the moment I still can't find the name of it, but whatever. So it's where the Pandestry resides, and it's basically just that's where they discover the people in charge. In the meantime, they also sort of started a revolution on the city itself, where the regular people sort of took over the people leading it. It's a whole thing. Again, you have to read the book to understand what I'm talking about. But eventually, the Doctor and friends make their way to the Grand Matriarch, the woman in charge of both Kirith and the Pandestry and everything else, which, as I'm pretty sure you've already been able to guess by now, is actually the little girl that the
Right.
Doctor met years and years ago. It's just now she's a 5,000-year-old power-hungry maniac who absorbs people to try and become the ultimate being. She tries to absorb Ace and to become the ultimate powerful being in the universe. And eventually, Raphael gives his life to stop her and save Ace in the process. Of course, as the Doctor suspected all along, she was actually the fake Ishtar slash the Timewyrm inhabiting her head all along. And he tries to capture her again, but because there's another book in the
Yeah.
series, she escapes again. And well, they sort of left the situation, or rather the city of Kirith, in a better situation than was when they arrived. But now it's off to finding the time room again. Now, before we jump into the last book, final thoughts on this book?
So this is the one that's furthest away from Earth. Did you like? Is there a book that you just didn't enjoy? You said that the second book, Exodus, was your favorite one. Is there a book that you didn't really enjoy at all, or everyone was pretty good? It's just that you
I don't know.
prefer Exodus.
I enjoyed all of them so far.
Yeah.
Uh, but this one, like I said, it's this being detached from Earth doesn't mean that it's not good. It's just, you know, there ain't a lot of history to be talked about. Even in the book itself, they mentioned that these people, the Kithrians, they have no history. Everything was fabricated. You know,
Right. Oh, so it's kind of like with the Eighth Doctor there when they're over in what was that place called? Not is it Neverland that they were over in? Those people had no history. The one with the
no,
uh
they were those were people who
Shearers.
have been No, they were erased from history.
Oh, that was okay.
Yeah, but by the oubliette of eternity.
Right. Hmm.
But yeah,
What a show
this
off.
is this is sort of different. Where some basically people came to that planet 500 years ago and created the Kithrians and fabricated their entire history. So they've only been existing for a couple of centuries. They
Okay.
have they have no history of their own. I'm sure there's a sci-fi example or equivalent to that somewhere, but I just can't think of it at the moment.
Hmm.
So, you want some revelations now?
Revelate me.
So, yeah, Timewyrm
Ooh,
Revelation. I
astronauts.
think
Ooh.
this is by far the most dense book out of the four, and I think it's kind of my second favorite in
Okay.
a way. And well, so basically, the Doctor thinks he finally found the Time Worm, and he's now found a way to trap her. So he goes back into a place that he frequently visits, apparently because the first I've heard of it. But yeah, when you read the book, it's first time you ever heard of it. But apparently, it's a place that the Doctor frequently visits called Sheldon Boniface, where he has some old friends there. There's a bar where he's very frequently welcome. People always ask, and he always visits there in various different incarnations. So they always know they think there's sort of a family of doctors rather than the same man coming and going all the time. And there's a sentient church in that place, like
Right.
a living, thinking church.
Hmm.
Think of that for a minute. Anyway, so after the Doctor gets bullied by some people who just turn into a ravenous, angry mob, Ace tries to get away from tries to get some sleep, where she starts falling back into some dreams. And now we're going back into something that's at the beginning of the book that I forgot to mention. But the book, all four of these books, essentially start with a prologue to something. And this, I think, is my favorite of the four. And we talked about how the book one starts with the massive space battle at the beginning. The second book,
Yep.
oops, sorry, where's the second book? The second book starts with the time worm infecting young Hitler as a little boy. The third book sort of opens with the scenes with the second Doctor and the little
Oh
girl.
yeah.
The third book is my favorite of the epilogue of the prologues, where on old Gallifrey, a young boy ran away from the academy to talk to his really close friend, a hermit who lives halfway atop of the mountain, where a
Hmm.
tree is sprouting from the cracks of the mountain, tending to a small yellow flower, and telling him that the people in the academy simply don't understand him, and the hermit basically tells him to not to worry, to continue with his special work, because one day maybe they'll understand. More importantly, one day maybe he will understand. Of course, if you know anything about Doctor Who, it's of course the hermit and the flower and the very notable story that the third Doctor talked about in the Time Monster. Yeah, the Time Monster. Yeah. So it's very important. It might actually end up turn up several times throughout the book. Now, as I said, this is the most dense out of all the books. This is the one where the most things are happening in it. So we're gonna have to skip through many of them. But all in all, after the angry mob lets go of the Doctor and they all sort of go back to being the regular normal self, the Doctor starts to realize that something is wrong, something's not quite right happening in this village. Sheldon Boniface, meanwhile, Ace falls into one of her old nightmares from her childhood, where a figure from her childhood shows up, a character, a bully known by Chad Boyle, who really used to bully her as a little girl, mainly because she was different, and mainly because she's always said she wanted to be an astronaut when she grew up. Obviously, if you don't know,
Okay.
um, Ace's full name is Dorothy McShane, but at that time she was normally referred to as Dottie as a little girl. Probably the reason why she hated that name so much and decided to change her name to Ace as she grew up. But yes, so the this little boy, Chad Boyle, did something to her when she was a little girl. Because she wanted to be an astronaut, one day on the playground, he picked up a brick and smashed her in the head with it, killing
What?
her. Yeah, and killing her in the process. We'll get back to that plot point later. But then she obviously wakes up and starts running away from her past, literally running away from her past. And she then notices a small dwarf astronaut figure. I've seen here in this
Hmm.
picture, a really small midget uh, astronaut when he takes his who starts chasing her across the village. When eventually she realizes that it was actually Chad Boyle in the astronaut suit chasing her. So she's basically fighting one of her own nightmares. While trying to run away from her, she takes one step and she finds out that they were actually on the moon this whole time. And she yeah, and she obviously there is no air oxygen on the moon, so she suffocates and starts drifting away from the moon into the vastness of space. And that's how like chapter 2 ends
Yeah,
with chapter 1 or 2. That's how the chapter ends. Good luck with that. So
it's all in her mind. It's all in her mind.
are you sure? Because
Uh, I don't know.
no, because later it turns out that all the other characters from the bar and from the village of Sheldon Boniface weren't actually real. The whole village was blown up completely, landing the doctor and some friends inside the sentient church, also on the surface of the moon. So now, basically, the majority of the story takes place on the moon, inside a talking church.
It's a tale as old as time.
Do I have your attention now, Mr. Snark?
Yeah.
Now, of course, it then turns out that it was all just a massive ploy by the Timewyrm. If you couldn't already guess, of course, they
Oh, okay.
bring Ace's dead, lifeless body into the church where they try to keep her safe. The Doctor is also being chased by another astronaut figure. This time, a full-sized man
Hmm.
who no, sorry, no, he wasn't an astronaut. He was the leader of the people that led the angry mob against him in the bar before it turns out that the bar was fake and it was all just an illusion and they were actually on the moon the whole time. The leader of the angry mob that tried to kill the doctor before the destruction of Sheldon Boniface reveals his true identity. Can you guess who that person actually is?
The the war chief.
No, but it's another character we talked about today.
Oh, master.
No.
I don't know. Who is it?
Lieutenant Hemmings,
Oh, Hemming.
the Nazi guy from this story.
Oh my God.
Turns out that the time worm sort of
Chased him
came
all the
to
way.
him.
All right.
Yeah. The time worm sort of came to him and told him that he can get his revenge on the Doctor. Little did he know that later in the story he was going to get on Chad Boyle's nerves a little too much, and so Chad Boyle literally punched his head off. He literally just punches the guy's head off
Sure.
in the book. And now, meanwhile, going back to Ace basically goes through all the several layers of hell. Every layer is a different location. And the first location she finds herself in is in a massive library where she finds a mysterious librarian character who, and stop me if you heard this before, has a long black frock coat, uh, checkered trousers, and a long flowing silver hair.
Mm-hmm.
Sound familiar?
Sure.
And he's apparently the librarian who gives her good advice and tells her to fight whatever is chasing her. She starts being chased by Chad Boyle once again. She goes back into she's being regressed mentally and physically into being a child again. She has to face her demons at school while running away from this Chad Boyle guy. Meanwhile, in the church, there are a lot of scenes that take place inside the church with just some of the regular people there. There's this reverend and this married couple. I'm not gonna touch on that too much because it's kind of boring, and there really is one major notable event that happens with these guys, but we'll get to that when we get to that. So the Doctor eventually decides to make himself unconscious so he can enter inside the dreamscape where Ace is and where the Time Worm controls everything, essentially. So after finding Ace during one of those dreamscapes, they eventually arrive in an area that's basically like a large hedge maze. Just imagine the maze from Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire.
Right.
You
Yep.
know,
Yep.
the massive hedge maze
Of course.
where they're chasing and being chased by this Chad Boyle, and Ace, of course, with her explosives, she tries to blow him up, and they burn down the entire maze until there's nothing really left, and they just keep changing from one place to the other, all the many different realms. I'm skipping a lot of the stuff from the book because read the book yourself if you're interested.
Sure.
They eventually meet the librarian once again, which is of course the first Doctor, and that was really around the time when the Timer decided to show up, and for ensuring that the Doctor had an appointment with Death
Hmm.
herself, because in case you didn't know already, Death is literally a woman in the Doctor Who universe. So like Death from the Marvel universe, the one
Hmm.
that Thanos and
They
Deadpool are
love that.
obsessed with.
Sure.
She's basically the same thing. The personification of Death is a skeletal woman in robes. So
How lovely.
yeah, and she does have a certain level of history with the Seventh Doctor, both in the novels and also in the audios. I really encourage you to look that up because it's really interesting. But yeah, once again, the Doctor and Ace are being separated by the Time Worm. Or sorry, no, not quite yet, because the Doctor knows of one place that they can go where the Time Worm won't get to them, and it apparently is a alternate place on a alternate version of planet Earth that the Doctor knows he has a friend there that can help them, until they discover that alternate version of planet Earth has been taken over by Nazis, led by the very much alive Lieutenant Hemmings, who is physically dead in the real world with his head punched off, but
Hmm.
his consciousness has survived inside the dreamscape. And this friend that the Doctor mentioned could help them is a prisoner of this Lieutenant Hemmings. And can you guess who that is?
The friend will be, let's say, the second Doctor.
Close. It was the third Doctor.
Ah,
Which
even
then
better.
is which then yeah, once they're being taken in prisoner, and the three of them are put into a prison cell, and while Ace is being taken away by Hemmings to be tortured, the seventh Doctor and the third Doctor have a conversation among themselves, where the third Doctor essentially lays the bomb on him, where this was actually the Inferno universe this whole time. Did you see the episode Inferno, by the way?
I don't think so.
It's third Doctor's first season
Oh,
finale.
I probably have seen it then. I've seen all
So
the Third
basically,
Doctor stuffs, but I just can't remember off the top of my head.
it's the one where he goes into an alternate world where everyone's different. It's
Okay.
like he finds evil versions of the unit people and like the Brigadier with an eye patch.
Yeah. All right.
You don't remember that one?
No.
I highly recommend looking that up.
Oh,
But
I will.
yeah, but again, it's an alternate universe, and the third Doctor assumes that the reason why everything went so horribly wrong in that alternate universe was because he wasn't around to be there, until he realizes that the evil fascist leader of the government over on that side of the world was actually one of the optional faces that the Time Lords proposed to give him when they decided to force regenerate him.
Right.
So essentially, the leader of the fascist um, party on this planet Earth is an alternate version of the third Doctor. Yeah, try to live with that. Now, in the meantime, the people in the church, or rather the sentient church, uses his telekinetic powers to roll Lieutenant Hemming's head back into it, where they essentially turns out that the woman Emily has psychic powers for some reason, and
Sure.
she basically Kitty Pride from Days
Yeah,
of
yeah.
Future Past, the movie, to try and contact him, and thinking that he's a friend of the Doctor's, but turns out he's anything but a friend of the Doctor. But bringing his consciousness back into his severed body kills him in the dreamscape and allows Ace and the other two Doctors to escape. Now, at some point later in the story, the Doctor and Ace fall down in a massive pit where they're being confronted by the victims of the Doctor, including but not limited to a row of Daleks, several unit soldiers, the Silurians from the
Mm-hmm.
Silurian episode, and of course the deceased companions who try to convince Ace to not follow the Doctor anymore, namely Katarina, Sarah Kingdom, and of course Adric.
Mm.
Now, along the way, there's some more stuff happening with the Doctor, Seventh Doctor, and Third Doctor, um, running along on a gondola, which eventually, by the end of the story, it's revealed to be the Fourth Doctor from the unproduced Shada episode. It's a whole thing, but uh, but yeah, later, it's sort of, it all comes into a head with uh, a massive fight inside a pit inside the Doctor's brain, with Ace versus the Time Worm, who's actually been manipulating everything all along. And while Ace tries to fight off the Time Worm almost defeats Ace when the Doctor pops up behind her and throws her into a deep, dark pit inside his brain, inside his mind, I should say. And I kind of love the line that the Doctor has. The Doctor has a really great one liner in this, where uh, the Time Worm basically just says to Ace that he's nothing more than just a dream, and the Doctor, while showing up behind you and throwing into a pit, he's like, a dream to some, a nightmare to others.
Ooh.
Now, that's a really strong line. Anyway, so the
Straight out of
Doctor,
the 80s.
yeah, so the Doctor and Ace are then joined by Amy, who somehow manages to psychically drop herself into the Doctor's mind. The three of them try to escape, climbing down this big metaphysical ladder, but Ace is being dragged down by all the other dead victims of the Seventh Doctor's hands, who drag her down, and she eventually lets go to allow the Doctor and Emily to escape. While inside, she tries to wander around the Doctor's brain a little bit more and try to figure out how to essentially stop the Time Worm once and for all. She meets these three witches, which I'm using the daughters of Atlas from Shazam
Nice.
to get my point across, because one of them's a little girl, one of them's a slightly older woman, and the other one's an old woman. Yeah, I apologize for using this picture, but it's kind of the first thing that came to my head.
All
Either
right.
that or like the fates from Hercules the movie. But they basically they tell Ace that they're parts of the Doctor's persona that he keeps locked away behind, and they sort of give her they sort of help guide her along the way to try and find to get further in the Doctor's psyche, where she eventually finds once again this long tree right next to someone chained up and tied to the trunk of the tree, which is of course the Fifth Doctor, because he hasn't showed
Of
up at
course.
all
Of
this whole
course it
time.
is. Yeah.
We had all the other Doctors. Where was he this whole time?
Mm-hmm.
Minus the Sixth Doctor, but never mind. So there's basically this big confrontation between the Time Worm and Ace about releasing the Fifth Doctor. Ace eventually frees him, and he goes running off. The Doctor once again shows up, uh, and they try to fight the Time Worm inside the Doctor's mind. Once again, the Doctor starts to really lose his mind up in the real metaphysical world, while Ace is fighting the Time Worm inside his mind. This Chad Boyle character shows up once again, wants to kill Ace, but Ace does the usual thing that the Doctor usually does, at least in the modern series, where he decides not to fight him, but rather forgive him, which apparently somehow works. Now, meantime, while the Doctor is about to commit a uh, to execute the time worm up in the real world, inside his head, his fifth Doctor has a conversation with the first Doctor persona, where he finally brings him the flower that the hermit tried to protect at the beginning of the book. And the Doctor sort of has a change of mind, where he wants it, just like I said earlier, with not fighting but forgiving. He eventually manages to dispose of the Time Worm's persona by putting her consciousness inside a baby, a,
Uh,
a baby that was in the church this whole time.
okay.
It's a really complicated and messed up story. I'll admit. There's a scene where the Doctor is fighting the Time Worm in a gladiatorial arena surrounded by gods and other monsters from other mythologies.
Hmm.
That's more or less when this scene happened. Not this scene from the Five Doctors, but the
Right.
scene with the Fifth Doctor and the First Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and the last chapter of the book, or rather the epilogues,
Sure.
plural, because this book sort of has the Lord of the Rings multiple endings at the end.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so basically it's just tidying everything up in a neat little bow. It turns out that Doctor and Ace broke into a laboratory in the 22nd century and stole a baby that was created in a lab. So that's how they had somewhere to put the the Time Worm's consciousness inside. And eventually the two people from the church who were in the story this whole time for no good reason other than this, eventually they decide to adopt the baby as their own, calling her Ishtar Hemmings.
Ooh.
And that more or less is the story. Again, obviously there are some moments we skipped across the all four books, but that is basically the basic gist of the story. Of course, the rest of the story of the Seventh Doctor and Ace continues on with the next installment, two installments of the Virgin New Adventures, the Cat's Cradle series, but that is a story for another time. So, final thoughts. What do you think about all four of these stories in a nutshell?
So the stories end with Ace and the Doctor becoming intergalactic kidnappers.
Essentially, yeah, baby
Nice.
nappers, I would say.
Yeah, sure. Uh, it sounds like just plots from Big Finish. Like this is before Big Finish, though, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I guess when the show ends in '89, this stuff comes out. It's pretty exciting to at least get New Who. Um, yeah, I don't know how I feel. I was doing a quick bit of looking up when you were talking. We're waiting for to see what that author's name, Paul Cornell, comes up. Like Terrence Dix, like that name I recognize and stuff like that. So it's like, oh, so were these guys all script writers on Doctor Who? And Paul Cornell wasn't, but when it came to the Big Finish, he's the guy that created Bernice Summerfield. So,
He created her in these books, by the way.
okay, so yeah,
Yeah.
so he continues on. So he still has voice. Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. It's so most of these are Seventh Doctor books, but eventually it'll go into Eighth Doctor as well. Like this is
Well,
just before Big Finish kind of thing.
I mean, there's like 60 books,
Oh shit! All
and
right.
I think the last one or the last two are Eighth Doctor ones. Before the Eighth Doctor got a separate series of books just for himself.
I see.
Yeah, and hold on, I'm just trying. So yeah, I was right. So Paul Cornell, by the way, he actually did write for the TV show as well.
I do.
He wrote Father's Day.
Oh,
The
okay.
one with Rose's father, and he also one of the other novels that he writes in this series specifically is obviously Love and War, which is where Bernice Summerfield was introduced, but also he wrote the novel Human Nature, which was later adapted into the TV version Human Nature and the Family of Blood. So
Okay.
that's maybe where you're familiar with the name.
Right.
And Terrence Dix was also a script editor for some of the classic series, and he also wrote the vast majority of the Target novelizations, which essentially took the previous episodes from or serials from the show and adapted them into novelizations with a few added parts in between here and there. So
Yeah.
that's really where you probably more recognize the name. John Peel, I believe, who wrote the first one, and because he hated the Seventh Doctor, and you can kind of tell when you read the first book,
Hmm.
uh, he never wrote for the Seventh Doctor ever again, but he wrote several other novels for other Doctors, particularly the Eighth Doctor.
Okay.
And this Nigel Robinson is the name sounds familiar, but I can't really place it at the moment.
Right. Very English sounding name.
Very like, show me your English without telling me you're extremely English.
Nigel.
Nigel Robinson.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap this up?
No, so 60 books. And so they're all about the same length then. They're about 120 pages each or so. There isn't any big novelizations. These are more like stories within for these books or
Well, I
whatever.
suppose they mainly just they're there to just be more episodes. I mean, they never, even some of the newer books from the modern series, they're never really that long. Like they're about this.
Okay, let's go timey wimey. Let's go back. The series ends. Your AGR right now. There's no big finish. How excited are you when these books start showing up?
I'm not born yet.
No, but we're going back in time. You're just erasing. We're getting timey wimey. I said you're going back in time. You're the same age you are now. The series just ended. You're pretty bummed, and all of a sudden you're thinking, oh, all these new books are coming out. It's continuing the story. How excited do you get?
I mean, as long as there's something new,
Yeah,
give it to me all day long.
right. So I know when even when Buffy ended and they started coming out with the eighth season comics or whatever, it was exciting for the first bit, and then everything just kind of trails off after a while. But 60
Well,
bucks is it's a pretty big deal. Like that's pretty impressive. So they did that over a 10-year period before, or it would have been more than that, I guess. About a 14-year period before the TV show started back up, or did it continue on even after the TV show?
let me check though because the let's see the Virgin New Adventures. It's a good thing I have Wiki right here with
Sure.
me. Okay, so 61 books, and only the last one is the Eighth Doctor, and obviously they then also had uh, Bernie Summerfield also got her own standalone series of just the Bernie Summerfield adventures, and as for the Eighth Doctor novels, let me see, because I mean the Eighth Doctor is like, even though he only had like the one movie and a few appearances here and there, he's got like the most lore surrounding him with like another series of books and um, and comics, and of course the Big Finish stuff.
Big
But
Finish.
like, he's one of the doctors that had the most stories to him. Let me just see. Is this no? That's not it. It's a good thing we're doing this live, folks. Am I right?
Yes. Yeah.
Dang it! I'm just trying to see what how many books does the Eighth Doctor novels go into, because there's a lot.
Hmm.
Okay, here's Eighth Doctor Adventures. Here we go. Okay, so 72 books
Just for the
just
eighth
for
Doctor?
the Eighth Doctor. Yeah, just
Wow.
for the Eighth Doctor, and that's not even including the comics and all the Big Finish stuff. So
Are all of these books considered canon then?
it's Doctor Who.
Yeah, everything is everything.
Everything is canon until it isn't.
Nice. Smart.
And that's all I have to say as far as canon.
Okay.
I mean, it's canon if you want it to be. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
And I think that's really how canon should be taken as.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So, should we wrap this up?
Sure. Let's do it.
Sure. Great. So, where can people find you on the interwebs, my man?
Well, if you want an extremely boring follow, you can follow me on Twitter at Snarky Yeti, like this abominable snowman. Uh, but yeah, don't really do much. You can see me here on the Northern Entertainment Group on a show called Have You Seen This? We Talk Television. That's Tuesdays. You can lots of stuff over at Let's Get Ready Network. I'm doing some more stuff with the Entertainment News Breaks with Justin. Also doing sports shows on the Highlights Network. They have with Starting 11 about the English Premier League and Playoff Beers, which is about the Stanley Cup playoffs. Both of which are coming to a head here last week for the Premier League and Stanley Cup playoffs, almost at the finals. So I'm gonna have some free time coming up here in the next couple of weeks, which is exciting.
Very cool. And you can find me on my own YouTube channel, 50 Shades of Geek, where I do weekly reviews of every single Doctor Who episode from 1963 all the way up to 2022. And I've got something pretty special regarding that series coming up this. Well, actually, by the time this will be uploaded, it will already be on my channel. So never mind that. But you should probably check that out anyway. And you can also find me every Monday talking about the greatest show in the galaxy, Doctor Who, right here. And every Thursday with my friend Soda on Fun with Flags, where we teach each other about our individual countries. And you can also check out all these other wonderful places to check out on the interwebs. We got something to talk about, Taco's channel. We got Galaxy Geeks, Multiverse of Geekdom, our friend Ben's Legacy channel, The Movie Lovers Unite, Midnight Cinema, and A-Town Reviews. That is really all we can say on that. And join us next month where we'll have a completely brand new topic to talk about. So until that happens, in the words of Missy herself,
don't forget to like and subscribe.
bye.